I'm going to bring your attention to a spot, a scenario in MTT poker where people just make mistakes here. Pre-flop is not the most difficult aspect of this concept to grasp, although, to be fair, some are making mistakes in the pre-flop node of what I'm about to show you, but it's post-flop where the strategy shifts start to break off from what is standard, and I suspect, a lot of us are not thinking enough about the nuance of what I'm about to show you, and that's going to impact your win rate negatively and probably compound so into the future. But once you walk through this little lesson I'm going to give you, you will have much more clarity in the asymmetric type of setups that you see in MTTs. So first, what we're going to look at is just a baseline ship EV sim with equal stacks. That way we have our ranges and our setup as we would typically start with. Then what we're going to do is show a sim where the small blind has a shorter stack, how that impacts the button open and the big blind defense. And then what we're going to do is go into the post-flop nodes, which is where the real problem may begin. Let's get into it. I ran my own 50 big blind sim here. That way I can compare very cleanly between the equal stack model, which we will work off, and the asymmetric stack model that we will work off, which I also ran myself. The open size is the same, it's a min raise. We are six-handed. Doesn't matter too much, although technically there would be a sliver of card removal effects applied to a six-handed game differently than if there were 9 or 8-handed. If we're on the level of opening fractional combos differently based on card removal, then my God, I think we should find a new hobby or job, whatever this is for you. So this is the open, 52.6% on the button. Big blind defend, around 75. Probably not a whole lot of surprise here at this stack depth with six-handed ante. There's a little less ante in the pot, so you're not going to see any real jams. I think if you made the antes bigger, you might see some jams coming in, like with the ace queen, for example, or the pocket eights. Now what I'm going to do is jump over to the asymmetric sim preflop. And the small blind has 20 big blinds. Drastic drop off for the button. Now, if you're not tightening up your button opens into this type of asymmetric setup, there is leak 1 that you need to fix. Otherwise, you're going to get run over. And I know some metas don't exactly have the most aggressive small blinds, but depending on what pool you play in, there are definitely some players out there that are capable of going even wider than what this suggests. I would caution against opening too wide into that sort of lineup. And the big blind is defending a little tighter here. You can see they're folding 12% compared to 9.7. Not a huge adjustment. There are some adjustments made on the margin. And now eights is starting to become an iffy 3-bet. Ace 10 has fallen off. We're just shifting our value range up. Small details, but watch how these compound as we go to the flop. Now I'm going to bring up sims for post flop, and we're going to walk through how these two situations truly size up against one another. We are here on the flop now, and this is the sim with symmetric stacks, 50 big blinds effective. And I think for the most part, the vast majority of the field, whichever field you're in, is likely just studying 50 big blind spots off of 50 big blind sims. So what's happening is they may actually be in an asymmetric setup, but when they go to review their hand, they're simply loading up a 50 big blind sim, and they're just going through the sim, if they're doing spot checks, as if they were playing 50 big blinds effective. Well, that's all well and good, except for the fact that if you were in the asymmetric setup that we showed previously, that is the button opening 43%, something is going to change about post flop. And it's maybe obvious to some of you what it is, and you've already realized that you've been just autopiloting on your 50 big blind defense, and you haven't taken this into consideration. But remember, you're up against a tighter range. So against the symmetric stacks, I want you to pay close attention to the king high block, because this is the block that starts to become indifferent towards a bet. As you can see, king 10, king jack, king queen are all defending against a 25, technically 26% pot bet when the stacks are symmetric. Now, if we jump over to the sim where the button has 43% of an open range, look at what happens to the king high block. King 10 becomes a pure fold. King jack is pretty much a fold. And then many of the suited kings that were auto peels are starting to become a bit dicey, specifically the ones in the middle here. The highs and the lows still hold up relatively well, but these middling suited kings are really falling off. What's going on here? Well, it's quite simple. The button is opening a tighter range, and therefore they have less air, less hands that king high has more equity against when they bet. But all the value hands are pretty much in there the same weight, right? Button still opens every pocket pair. Button still opens almost every ace, although ace 2 is out. Button is opening the 9x block, but they're not going as far down into the air. So hands like 10-4, Jack 3, 8x offsuit, 8-7, 9-7, King 6, and some of the lower suited hands have just fallen out of the range. Okay? So what ends up happening is your king high just has less equity. And you can see this a little bit more clearly if you play around with the tools here in GTO Wizard or whichever solver program you use. If we look at the pure equity here, king 10 has 34% against the tighter range. And in the simulation where the stacks are symmetric, king 10 is 39%. So right away, the mistakes that you might be making are you're just peeling the flop too wide when the button open has tightened. And another thing to keep in mind as well, to be aware of, is when you have ICM factors in play and people are opening a tighter range even in symmetric stacks or close to symmetric stacks, maybe the small blind doesn't have 20 big blinds, but maybe they have 35 to 40, and it doesn't look like there's going to be too much difference in the sim. However, when the ICM model has the button opening 46% of hands or 47% instead of 53%, now those fringe hands do become probably unprofitable peels. For the sake of this video, we're just looking at chip EV models to keep things simple. And if you guys have watched my videos, followed my content in my seminars, I'm sure you know I have a lot of beef with ICM models, and I do have some strategies to play around them a bit when it comes to post flop, but for the sake of this video, we're not going to go there. So the next part of this exercise is we're going to move on to the turn. All right, post flop, B25, 26, my bad. Big blind call. This is the symmetric stack, okay? How do you know? Well, the cheat code for us now is king highs are calling more. Queen highs as well. I just isolated the king high block because it was sort of the point of indifference where things started to shift in the range. But there are other high card hands that are calling in this model that end up folding in this model. This model being the symmetric, the asymmetric stacks. Back to the symmetric stacks. We're going to compare how things look on the river first, and then we'll back up to the turn. I think that's actually one of the best ways to size up your defense. So in the symmetric stacks model, facing a triple barrel with a turn sizing of Geo, and of course this is a little bit oversimplified because you could have two sizes on the turn, with one being, say, B75, and then also having a geo size, and your range will be a little bit different. But as far as how the big blind defends, it's going to be very close to the same. Because in this spot, in position by the river, we'll have enough air or high card hands to force the big blind to defend and clear MDF with their paired holdings. In position gets to just bluff you with impunity if you decide, I'm just going to fold my mixed catchers. Like, I don't need to defend because I don't feel like it, or whatever reason people make up for not calling appropriately. And you can see here, button has no shortage of high card hands or under pairs. They have no shortage of high card hands to potentially bluff if they suspect that you're going to overfold your pairs. So on the river, out of position, should be calling. I mean, they don't even have to call second pair, which is pretty great. But they pretty much have to call every ace. 13% fold. If you overfold the ace-x block, in position is going to print money and capture a larger percentage of the pot. On the river, clearing MDF will require to call just about every top pair combo. This is in the symmetric stacks model, okay? Now let's jump over to the asymmetric stacks model, where, remember, in the asymmetric setup, the small blind had 20 bigs. Therefore, the button is opening a tighter range. They're opening 43%. On the flop, the button range bets 25%, 26%, and the big blind continues, but folds a little bit more often because they have less equity. So some of these marginal hands like King 10, King Jack, King X with a backdoor flush draw are now finding folds on the flop. When we get to the river and the button jams, the button still has the ability to bluff here. Okay, they have no main hand, king high. They can still fold the big blind off of their top pairs. So the big blind needs to defend correctly. Otherwise, they are giving up too much of the pot to the button. And the button can counter exploit that by simply over bluffing. Check, shove, top pair. Whoa, what just happened? Now we actually do get to fold top pair a decent amount. So for those of you who are nits at heart, congratulations. Why are we folding so much more with top pair here? Because even though the range, okay, look at it this way. The situation feels kind of the same. Button opens, we're 50 effective, we call, we face a triple barrel, we have top pair. I honestly don't know the number, so correct me if my estimate is way off. But I would guess that 96% of tournament players who make money playing poker in some capacity, whether they're a part-time or a pro, are probably not even building this into their thought process on how to defend the river. They're just simply thinking, I have this many big blinds effective and I'm facing a triple barrel. And to be fair, probably half of them are thinking on even lower level terms, I think he's bluffing, I call, or I don't think he's bluffing, I fold. This guessing game thing is a little bit naive to think that you're always going to be able to just guess your way through these spots. Sometimes you just don't know, and sometimes you're up against a player who is relatively balanced and you're not sure which side of the equation they're on, whether it's over bluffing or under bluffing, because they're pretty good at constructing their ranges, and they're the type of person that will occasionally show up giving up some of the air. As you can see, some of your air does just give up occasionally, but then other times they're going to find that triple barrel. So what's going on with this? Well, the button has a tighter range, we know that, but we still have to defend, right? Well, here's the thing. This will come down mostly to what's happening on the turn, which is also a function of what happened on the flop. But if we look at the turn, because we're getting to the turn with a stronger range, in the asymmetric sim, we end up continuing with weaker pairs much less often. So let's first look at the symmetric sim to show that third pair in the symmetric sim is calling 40% of the time to a turn barrel. I think there are some opponents out there lurking around who might just fold all of their 9x to this sizing. To be fair, it is a 125% pot overbet. Still, you must defend appropriately, otherwise you're going to get run over from the bluffs in Villain's range, which he has no shortage of. In the asymmetric model, where the small blind is 20 bigs, on the flop, we are defending less. We get to the turn, folding a little bit more here, and the key is we are now calling third pair 28% of the time. So we've got 28.4 compared to 40 on the turn versus B125. We're continuing less often with third pair, which means our range on the river is now stronger in the asymmetric model than what it was in the symmetric model. If you don't understand equilibriums and how they work, and you don't understand theory at all, you're going to not really get this. And I suggest you leave a comment and ask me any question to clarify what's happening. If you need a bit of a framework on how to evaluate rivers, that is something I can potentially help with. And I say potentially because I don't like promising making YouTube videos. If you really want me to make a YouTube video about river frameworks and how to think about defending the river, then I will make one. But for now, we'll just stick with this. On the river, when you have a stronger range, you don't just automatically call the same strong range. If you did, you would be calling too often for imposition to monetize any of their bluffs. And if that's true, then imposition will just never bluff. They'll always check back their air, and you just calling station every ace to a triple barrel. If imposition knows you're always going to call your ace X in this case and not mix, then they won't bluff you and they'll value town you. And now if you know that they know that, you're going to start folding your ace. But then if you start folding your ace, they're going to start bluffing you, and the back and forth leads to an equilibrium. The equilibrium in the event of an asymmetric setup where the small blind is short stacked and the button has to now open tighter, it shifts the strategies from pre-flop to the flop to the turn such that on the river, these small changes compound to the point where your river equilibrium has shifted fairly drastically. I mean, now we're folding top pair almost 40% of the time compared to 13. And this is one of those spots where most of your competition is not thinking at all about this. They're simply looking at the spot as if it's 50 big blinds effective and playing it out. This is a source of edge for you if you're looking for more than just very general, broad heuristics that are becoming a little bit more mainstream in the poker world. Most people know what hands to open pre-flop. Most people know what hands to defend. Most people know how to play against the flop c-bet. Most people know how to call down. It's the nuance where you're going to gain some edge. When you review hands, let's say you're reviewing big blind versus button, be very mindful of if it's an asymmetric stack setup. Contrast that asymmetric stack setup to how the spot would look if it were a symmetric stack setup. And if you want to take things further, you can start looking at those setups relative to some ICM scenarios But at the very least, you now have an added piece of information that will help change your decisions for the better, and this will compound over time and help you make more money. The vast majority of the field wants a blueprint system in the shortest amount of time to give them the key to mastering the game. The problem is unrealistic expectation will blind them to going a bit further. So it's not enough to just take a few courses and study a few spots with symmetric stacks and be on your way. Always be evolving and take things to the next level and get more and more granular as you get more experienced and more advanced. When you're reviewing hands, look at the nuances of the situation beyond just your effective stack. Go a bit further, understand what is happening when you have asymmetric stacks and how that's shifting ranges, and then you'll find yourself making more accurate decisions in game. In this case, the main takeaway is you're going to defend on the flop a little tighter in this asymmetric spot compared to the symmetric spot. You're up against the tighter open range. As a result, you're going to be folding some of the hands on turns that you call in symmetric stack mode a little bit more often. And that has an impact, a direct impact on your river strategy, because now you are arriving to the river with a higher percentage of top pair. And here you can actually see it in the GTO wizard. It says top pair 40% of the time, the big blind. And in the symmetric stacks, 31%. But if we go to the flop, we're looking at 7 versus 8. It doesn't look like a huge difference at first, but as the hand progresses and as these elements compound, you end up in a situation where if you call the same frequency, you're way off base.